The security guard's hand landed on his shoulder, but the man in the gray hoodie didn't flinch. He just clutched his sleeping daughter a little tighter, knowing she was about to watch him get thrown out of a building he actually owned. It was nearly midnight when Marcus strode through the gleaming glass doors of the Grand Regent on Fifth Avenue. The hotel was his crown jewel, the result of 12 relentless years spent transforming a failing property in Raleigh into a sprawling empire of luxury and service. But tonight he wasn't here as the owner. He was here as a tired father, his 8-year-old daughter, Zoe, a dead weight against his chest, her small fingers loosely wrapped around the tattered ear of a stuffed rabbit she called Barnaby. He'd been overseas for 3 months. The flight had been delayed, the rental car counter was a zoo, and the 45-minute drive home to their suburban house felt like a marathon he wasn't prepared to run. So he made the simple, logical call to stop here at his own flagship for one night of rest. He didn't call ahead. He never did. These unannounced visits were his way of seeing the true soul of his properties, the unfiltered reality his guests experienced when the boss wasn't watching. What he was about to witness would fundamentally change how he saw his own creation, and the truth was waiting for him at the front desk. His father, a night security guard for 2 decades at a different hotel, had taught him that lesson. The measure of a place, his dad used to say, his voice worn with exhaustion, isn't how it treats the guests in suits. It's how it treats the folks it thinks don't matter. Marcus carried that truth with him everywhere. The true test of a place is how it treats the people it thinks don't matter. Derek, the clerk on duty, was young, impeccably dressed, and his smile for the well-heeled couple a few feet away was practiced and bright. But that smile vanished when he saw Marcus approaching in his rumpled hoodie, worn jeans, and simple sneakers. He looked at Marcus, then at the sleeping child, and his gaze flickered with a quiet, swift judgment that was far more damning than any shouted insult. "Good evening," Marcus said, his voice low and even. "I need a room for the night, just one for me and my daughter." Derek didn't meet his eyes. He kept his gaze fixed on the computer screen, tapping keys without purpose. "Sir," he said finally, leaning forward slightly, his voice dropping to a level meant to carry just a little further than necessary. "This isn't a motel. You can't just walk in off the street here." The words hung in the air, deliberate and cutting. A woman sitting in the lounge nearby looked up from her drink. Marcus felt the weight of her gaze, the silent acknowledgement of the scene unfolding. He didn't react. He'd felt this weight before 100 times in 100 different rooms. He simply held Derek's gaze. "I'm aware of what kind of establishment this is," he said calmly. "I'm just asking for a room." But the clerk wasn't done, and the lesson Marcus was about to learn about his own company was just beginning. "We're fully booked tonight, sir," Derek said, his tone dripping with the smooth condescension of a practiced lie. "I apologize for the inconvenience. There's a motor lodge about 2 miles east. They might have something." Before Marcus could respond, the revolving doors swirled behind him. A couple walked in, the man in a crisp blazer, the woman draped in a designer coat. They carried an air of effortless expectation. Derek's entire demeanor transformed, his shoulders lifted, his smile returned, wide and genuine. "Welcome to the Grand Regent. Do you have a reservation?" The couple didn't. They were walk-ins, just like Marcus. But within minutes, Derek had their information, processed a credit card, and handed over 2 gleaming key cards with a flourish. Marcus watched the whole transaction. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The message was written in the air between them, a stark and humiliating thesis about who was welcome in the world he had built. The cold fury that settled in his chest was only tempered by the weight of his daughter, whose trust in him was far more valuable than the marble floors he was standing on. Zoe stirred, her voice a soft mumble against his shoulder. "Daddy, are we at the hotel yet?" Marcus gently adjusted his hold on her. "We're here, baby. Just give me 1 minute." He turned back to the desk, his voice still calm, but now carrying the undeniable authority of a man who has reached a decision. I need to speak with your manager, now. Derek's confidence flickered, but he picked up the phone and made a curt call. The lobby fell into a tense hush. People were no longer pretending to look away. They were watching the man in the hoodie, waiting to see what would happen next. The manager, Richard, arrived in under 2 minutes. He was a polished man in a dark suit, his expression carrying the weary authority of someone used to handling problems. He'd been briefed, and his decision was already made. "Sir," Richard said, positioning himself beside Derek, forming a wall of uniformed authority. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding. My staff has explained our availability or lack thereof. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "There's no misunderstanding," Marcus replied, his voice level. "I watched your clerk deny me a room and then book one for a couple who walked in right after me. I want you to explain that." Richard's jaw tightened. "Our staff exercised their professional judgment. I stand by their decision." His tone was final, dismissive. Marcus held his gaze for a long, silent moment. He thought of his father, of the weary way he'd come home and sit at the kitchen table, saying nothing for an hour. He thought of the weight of being judged not by his character or his conduct, but by the color of his skin and the clothes on his back. He wasn't angry, he was resolute. He needed to see how deep this rot went. "I need your full name and your official title," Marcus said quietly, pulling out his phone. Richard provided them without hesitation, his arrogance intact. Marcus nodded, noted the details, and then stepped away from the desk. He settled into a plush armchair in the lobby, Zoe still sleeping in his arms. He wasn't leaving. He was watching. And the man he was watching, Richard, was about to make a catastrophic error in judgment. Richard didn't retreat. He positioned himself near the front desk, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Marcus like a hawk watching a trespasser. He whispered something to Derek that made the young clerk straighten his spine. He glanced at the concierge, Maya, who had gone unnaturally still at her post. The tension in the lobby was palpable, a living thing. The guests at the bar had fallen quiet. Richard eventually approached. "Sir," he said, his voice a low, menacing hiss. "I've been patient, but you are now occupying a private establishment after being asked to leave." "This is a security matter." Marcus didn't stand, he just looked up. "I'm sitting in a chair, I'm not causing a disturbance, I'm merely waiting." "I'm not asking," Richard said, his voice rising slightly. He turned and gave a sharp nod to 2 security guards who had been loitering near the elevators. They moved forward, their bulk casting long shadows. It was in that exact moment that Zoe woke up. Her eyes snapped open, clear and alert, taking in the 2 large men, the manager's angry face, and the unnatural stillness of the room. She sat up, clutching Barnaby to her chest, and looked at Richard with the unflinching honesty of a child. "Why are you making us leave?" she asked. Her voice was small but cut through the tense silence like a bell. The question hung in the air, unanswered by Richard, but it resonated far deeper than he could have anticipated. Richard didn't answer her. He addressed Marcus. "This is your last warning." Zoe looked between the adults, her brow furrowed. "If they don't want us here," she asked, her voice a sincere whisper that somehow filled the entire lobby, "why do they work here? Aren't they supposed to help people?" The question was pure, simple, and devastatingly honest. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine inquiry from an 8-year-old who couldn't understand adult cruelty. It landed with the force of a physical blow, striking a nerve in the room. The couple by the elevator turned to watch openly. The guests at the bar put down their drinks. Even one of the security guards shifted his weight uncomfortably. Maya, the concierge, had gone pale, her eyes fixed on a spot on the counter. Marcus pulled Zoe close. "You didn't do anything wrong, Zoe, not one thing." He looked at Richard, whose face was now a mask of barely suppressed fury. "This has gone on long enough," Richard snapped. "Escort them out, now." The security guard stepped forward. Marcus rose slowly to his feet, Zoe still tucked under his arm. He didn't resist. He didn't move toward the door. He just stood, a statue of quiet defiance, and looked at Richard with a gaze that held all the weight of a man who had seen everything he needed to see. And then he reached into his pocket, not to resist, but to finally end the charade. With one arm holding Zoe, he pulled his phone from his hoodie pocket. He scrolled to a contact, pressed call, and held it to his ear. The call lasted less than a minute. He spoke just 4 sentences, listened for a moment, and ended the call. He put the phone away and looked down at his daughter. "Daddy," she whispered, "do we have to go?" "Not tonight," he said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "We're not going anywhere." Richard scoffed, taking a step forward. "Sir, I am telling you for the last time. Leave," the elevator chimed. It was a sound so familiar it was usually invisible, but tonight every eye turned to the doors. They opened, and Thomas Webb, the CEO of Johnson Hospitality Group, strode out. He was followed by 2 senior executives. His silver hair was slightly disheveled, his suit not fully buttoned, his face a thundercloud of anxiety. He crossed the lobby floor directly to Marcus, ignoring Richard entirely. He stopped a few feet away, looking at his boss as if he'd just seen a ghost. "Mr. Johnson," Thomas said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm so sorry, I was just informed." The lobby went silent. Not a dramatic film silence, but a true, unnerving hush. The jazz from the bar suddenly seemed obscene. Thomas turned to face the staff. His voice was low, but it carried the unmistakable edge of command. "This is Marcus Johnson. He is the founder and the sole owner of Johnson Hospitality Group. He owns this hotel, the chairs you're sitting in, and the uniforms you're wearing. He owns the contract that determines whether you work here tomorrow." Derek's face went ashen. Richard stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, a man whose entire world had just been restructured in a single sentence. Zoe looked from Thomas to her father, her eyes wide. "Daddy," she whispered, "you know this man?" Marcus looked down at her, his stern expression softening entirely. He pulled her close. "Yeah, baby," he said, "I know this man." What happened next was not a victory lap, but a painful reckoning for everyone in that room, especially the man who had ordered Marcus thrown out. Richard found his voice first, stammering, "Mr. Johnson. We had no way of knowing." Marcus listened without interrupting. When Richard ran out of words, Marcus spoke, his voice quiet and clear. "You're right, you didn't know who I was, and that is exactly the point. You didn't know who I was, so you decided I wasn't worthy of basic respect. You made that decision because of what I looked like, what I was wearing, and who you assumed I was." He took a step closer to Richard. "My father worked security for 22 years. He came home every night with a piece of his dignity missing, chipped away by people who looked at him the way you looked at me. I built this company because I believed that didn't have to be the way it is. The person standing in front of you deserves dignity before they've proven anything to you, not after, before." He looked at Thomas, who gave a solemn nod. "Richard," Marcus said quietly, "you're terminated, effective immediately." Richard's face crumbled. He attempted one more argument, but it died in his throat. He straightened his jacket one last time, a pathetic attempt at dignity, and walked away without another word. Marcus turned to the front desk. Derek looked like he was about to be sick. Marcus was about to deliver a verdict that was far more complex than the simple justice of a firing. "You made a choice based on appearances," Marcus told Derek. "I want you to sit with that, not with what it cost you, but with what it means. I'm not ending your career here, but you're not getting a pass. You're being enrolled in a full retraining program focused on our core values. You will learn what this work is for. If after that you still want to be here, the door is open. But tonight, that can never happen again to anyone." Derek nodded, unable to speak. Marcus walked to the concierge desk. Maya stood rigid, her eyes downcast. "You saw it," Marcus said softly, for her ears only. "You knew it was wrong, but you felt you couldn't say anything. I understand why. That's a failure of my leadership, not your character." Maya looked up, her eyes glistening. Marcus continued, "But I watched you tonight. I saw you recognize the line even when you felt you couldn't cross it. That matters. Starting tomorrow, you're being promoted to a guest services supervisor position. I need people in charge who can act on what they know is right. Maya's eyes widened. I won't let you down, Mr. Johnson. I know, Marcus said. He turned to address the rest of the lobby, the guests who had watched the entire spectacle unfold. The only standard I have never been willing to negotiate, he said, his voice carrying across the marble expanse, is respect. Every person who walks through our doors gets treated with it. Not based on what they're wearing, not based on what they look like, not based on what they have. Every person, every time, without exception. That is what this company is. Zoe tugged on his hand, her voice weary and sweet. Daddy. Can we get our room now? I'm really tired. A ripple of relieved laughter moved through the room. The tension broke, replaced by something softer. Marcus looked down at his daughter, his heart full. Even when the world tests you, your dignity is the one thing that is never up for negotiation. Yeah, baby, he said, his voice rough with emotion. We're getting our room. 3 months later, the revolving doors opened to admit a family. They were travel-weary, a couple with 2 young children, one of whom was determinedly dragging an overstuffed backpack. They looked tired, slightly frazzled, and not like the typical guests of a 5-star establishment. Maya was at the lobby entrance. She crossed over to them before they even reached the desk, a wide, genuine smile on her face. Welcome to the Grand Regent. My name is Maya. How can I make your stay easier today? She didn't look at their luggage. She didn't judge their tired faces. She just saw guests who needed help and offered it without hesitation. Within minutes, the parents had relaxed, their shoulders dropping. They were chatting and laughing with Maya by the time they reached the front desk. Across the lobby, Marcus stood in a quiet corner watching. He was wearing a jacket this time, though Zoe, beside him, was still clutching Barnaby under her arm. He hadn't announced himself. He wanted to see the everyday operation, the version of his dream that existed when he wasn't looking. Zoe watched Maya help the family. She saw the tired parents exhale and the kids' faces light up. Then she looked up at her father. The highest standard of leadership is not how you treat the powerful, but how you treat the powerless. Is that what it's supposed to look like, Daddy? She asked. Marcus watched the family settle in, watched the weight of the world lift from their shoulders. He felt a swell of pride, not in himself, but in the place his team had built. He looked down at his daughter, his legacy. Yeah, he said, his voice soft and sure. That's exactly what it's supposed to look like. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories that reveal the human condition.